Thank you
Hello,
very much.
everybody.
Good to have a
How
great
are you
meeting.
today? What a wonderful Friday that we've got here. And you guys came to join us for a discussion on assessment. So we're very, very happy that you're with us. My name is Chris Simcox. I'm the AAfPE president-elect. I'm also a faculty member at both Bucks County Community College in Pennsylvania, as well as University of Cincinnati. And I'm presenting today with Jenna Beck, who is also at University of Cincinnati, and I'm going to give her an opportunity to speak in just a second. Just a couple of things for the meeting. Please feel free to use the chat. I'm going to monitor that while Jen is speaking and try to get your questions answered as we go along. So if you have a question while we're going through this information, please just put it in the chat. That would be great. And if you could just make sure we have all of you muted for right now, but that doesn't mean you can't, when we open it up for questions or, ask you for some response, you can certainly unmute to do that. So I'm going to turn it over to Jenna.
Thank you, Chris. And it is wonderful to be able to present with Chris today and to talk about assessment. It happens to be one of my favorite topics. So while I'm sharing my screen, I'll give you a little bit of background information about myself. I am currently at the University of Cincinnati. I have held several different hats in higher education. Have been a full-time faculty member for paralegal studies for quite some time and at a community college prior to this, and also served in a dean role. I've also been an assessment coordinator for a college. And so I've seen assessment and worked with assessment in a variety of different capacities. And we are excited to talk about it today. As you can see, we're going to get you pumped and ready to think about assessment, hopefully in a different light. We know some of the misconceptions that are out there, and it can feel just like another thing that you have to do. But today we are going to put a positive spin on it and hopefully have everyone join the assessment bandwagon. So the first thing that we're going to just ask you is that in your reactions in Zoom, is we just like you to hit the reaction based on which level you feel you fall into when it comes to your assessment knowledge. So if you feel like you are an assessment expert, if you could give a thumbs up. If you feel like you're assessment fluid, you don't feel like you are necessarily an assessment expert yet, but you feel pretty confident in your assessment skills. If you could do the reaction of the clapping hands. And then finally, if you're an assessment novice, you are kind of new to this, what maybe have a general understanding of what assessment is, but you're really trying to kind of find your way in the assessment space. If you could give the reaction of a heart. So I'm going to look at your pictures and see if you could start putting up those reactions. I see one heart. I see a couple hearts. Clapping hands. Okay. So either we're humble and no one wants to say that they're an assessment expert yet. It looks like we have a good mix of people who are new to assessment and those who feel kind of fluent. So I think that will be good for our presentation today because we're going to talk about some building blocks first and foremost, but we're also going to talk about kind of some things that, you might already have some knowledge about, but how you could build upon. Okay. All right. So first, we want to tell you that we have a secret. Assessment has kind of become at times like this thing that just feels another thing on our plate with everything that we have to do. What's challenging too is that as legal professionals, for those of us who've gone to law school, it's not like law school is teaching you how to do assessment. So when you walk into the higher education space, it feels like this foreign thing. Also, a lot of schools don't necessarily do a great job of training individuals on assessment, so you feel like you don't know what you're doing. But our secret is that whether you know it or not, you actually like assessment. We all do. Um, you want the things you're doing to be better, the things you're involved in. That's usually our nature. We want things to keep going, to improve. When Chris and I were talking about this presentation, I was telling her about my children's soccer club. Any of you who are parents of kids who pay for your children to play select sports know you're paying a lot of money. And I was telling Chris, I made a comment to my husband about where is the club doing assessment? Like they never like assess the kids' skills or assess how the parents feel about things. And I'm paying a lot of money for this. Like I want to see a trajectory of things getting better. I don't think I even have to ask you that probably you have the same things in your personal life that you want to see get better, but also in your professional life, my guess is that you want to see students be successful. You want to see your program grow and be successful. And assessment is part of where that is at and how you do that. Are there lots of steps involved with it? Yes. But I think secretly we all like it. It's just figuring out how to do it and how to make it part of our everyday practice. So when we talk about assessment, first and foremost, what is it? And so I kind of look at it as twofold. One is a category of academic assessment. And so when we're talking about academic assessment as a whole, we're seeking to answer what and how well our students learn what we are teaching them. And so I was once told by one of my first supervisors, we teach for free, we grade for a living. And it often feels that way. We like the teaching aspect of it, but we want to make sure that our teaching was effective. Um, we don't want to just do it in a silo and not know how it impacted the students. So that is what overall academic assessment is seeking to know. How well did that work? And then for us, it's really important to think about this programmatic assessment, especially for the programs that have the ABA approval. And so you need to go a step further in regards to, is the program itself situated in such a way that results in success for the students? So looking at things like employment rates for states that have any sort of licensure or certification exam. In Ohio, for example, the OSBA, the Ohio State Bar Association, doesn't require certification, but there is a certification out there that paralegals can get if they choose to do so. Are students or graduates being successful on that? What do all of the metrics look like as it pertains to the program? Why is it important? Well, it's important for a variety of reasons. The first one being kind of what I've talked about already in regards to the spirit of continuous improvement and evaluation. Again, that thought that we want you to get better. We want our programs to get better. We want our students to get better. We have to know where those pain points are to see, is there a question that a student's not doing well on? Is there an assignment, a test that students are struggling with? If so, how do we drill down and figure out how to get students to meet that outcome? And we're going to talk about outcomes quite a bit here as we move forward. The second thing is that it allows you to be ready for questions. I'm sure there's many of us who have been, especially program directors, program coordinators, who have gotten a question by someone at the college, whether it be the dean, the provost, the president, that I need this data on this particular thing and I need it now. And doing continuous assessment and keeping on top of assessment allows us to answer those questions. It also allows you to know your program. So for example, when I was serving in a dean role, and this was not specifically a paralegal program, but we had a program that had really low enrollment. And in administration, we were questioning, is this program even relevant for our community in 2023? Is this something that we need? Why is the enrollment low and what does our community say about it? And when we approached the program director at the time, The program director didn't know. There had been no surveying of the community. There was an advisory board, but they hadn't been meeting regularly. Those questions weren't being asked. There were no focus groups of the community, no level of assessment, no looking at, how are people even getting jobs in this area? Are employers wanting the certification? What does that look like? And so, assessment, you should think of it as a tool belt, and you have all of these tools in which to not only make your program better, but when you're being asked these questions of administration or the outside community about what's going on in your program, you know the answers. And, I equate it to when you have a jury trial or a bench trial, or you're before the appeals court and they ask you a question, you want to be able to respond to that. You don't want to have to say, I'm not sure, court, I'm going to look into that further. And so having robust assessment data allows you to do that. Now, the final two reasons I think are the reasons why assessment doesn't seem as pleasing, or it makes us feel like we don't like assessment. And it's because it's something that we were required to do. It's a requirement of the American Bar Association. It's a requirement of the Higher Learning Commission or whatever regional accreditor you might be under. Some of us also have assessment requirements that are part of our school. We have those at the University of Cincinnati. I know Chris has them for her school as well, and she's going to talk a little bit about those later. So, you have to work to web all of those different bodies together and meeting all of their assessment. And I'm a big proponent of trying to, get those assessments, even though they're different, to try to help me answer some of the same things. And so, yes, it's a requirement, but many things in life are requirements. And so, we are just doing this to show continuous quality, which is important to us. It's important to our students, and it's certainly important to our graduates for the program to continue to be one of quality. So I'm going to stop here for a second. Chris, do you want to add anything in regards to just assessment overall and why it's important and what it is, before we start digging into a few things?
Just a couple of things. I mean, I don't know, and we did kind of give you give us a reaction as to where you sit in your knowledge of assessment. But we didn't kind of test you on like where you're involved with it. So whether it's on an instructor level where you're completing assessments, or whether you're in a program position where you're actually having to do the assessment, you'll have different feelings about that. But some of the things we'll talk about later are, like struggles from different angles, and the hope that we can, think about or talk about what makes it better. But I think one of the things that ultimately will make it better is if somebody really understands what the purpose of this is. So when Jenna gives us like, what is it and why do we do it? You know, it's easy for us to just say, well, it's required. I'd rather not say that. Like, I'd rather say the things that Jen is saying, explaining to people why it's necessary, making them understand that it's not just, okay, we have to do it. So I think keeping that in mind, and as she talks about the differences in assessment plans and course goals versus program goals, which a lot of people don't understand, a lot of faculty don't understand. And so they know that they do a learning objectives for their class, but they don't know how that relates to other things. So I'm really glad that we're just kind of even getting to this so that you guys could even have some other information in your toolbox to kind of tell your faculty, why do we have to do this and how this should happen. So
Great. Thank you, Chris. So for ABA approved programs, you have to have an assessment plan. And I think that that is always a good place to start when you are thinking about assessment, especially for those of you who are an assessment novice. And so you should know, if you're a novice, what your assessment plan says. And if you don't have one at all, hopefully you do, but if you don't have one, this is a good place to start or a good place to revise. Now, let's see, it was 10 years ago when I started in a program director position. I had an ABA reapproval, so the 7-year report due that very year. Um, it was a blessing and a curse. A curse because that's a really big challenge to have a 7-year reapproval report due, especially when for 5 of those years I wasn't even there. Um, but it was also a blessing because it made me have to be aware of what all of the requirements were really early on. And I don't know if I would have been as strong of a program director if I hadn't had that experience. So, for those of you in the novice category, and for all of us, going back and reviewing your assessment plan and the assessment plan requirements is something that should be done regularly, not something that should be done, oh, well, my reapproval reports due or my approval reports due. What does that say? And so I won't go through everything on this slide. There are multiple rules and provisions in the ABA rules that talk about what should be in your assessment plan or what you should be doing with assessment. But these are the basics. So the program stated goals and objectives, the assessment tools you are using, the way in which input is obtained, and then the frequency with which each assessment tool will be conducted. So I want to give you a look at the assessment plan that we currently have in place at the University of Cincinnati. And this came as a result of we are now under the same approval. We used to have a bachelor's degree under one approval because it was part of a different college, and then our associate's degree was part of a different approval. And we started looking at the different assessment plans we had and looking at a way to merge those. In addition, I just came on with the University of Cincinnati in January full time. But in addition, I brought some feedback of years ago having gone to a workshop that we did as part of an AAfPE presentation where we looked at different programs, assessment plans, and they vary across the board. I mean, you have some assessment plans that are really, really long and detailed. And then there were some programs that had an assessment plan that was more chart-based. But you can see from this chart that we actually do cover everything that was previously mentioned, going back a slide, in these points that the ABA gives us. We're stating our goals, we're stating the tool that we use, we're stating the frequency in which we do them. And that's why I say keep it simple, keep it compliant. It's simple, it's compliant. Now, is there a lot that goes into each of these rows? For sure. But it meets the baseline of ensuring what is required by the ABA rules. Okay. See, we have something in the chat.
And Mary asked about like how frequently you take a look at this plan, like how frequently do you evaluate it to change it? And how many goals do you actually have?
That's a great question, Mary. So first of all, assessment is it's tricky when it comes to changes, because if you start changing significantly your assessment items a lot, then it kind of defeats in some ways the purpose of assessment, because that assessment is looking different and you don't have that trend over time. So you do want to be careful when you change assessment, no matter what assessment we're talking about, not just the plan. So, you change the graduate surveys every year. Well, how can you measure any sort of trend data if you're changing that significantly? With assessment plans, when I served in the program director role at my previous college, this is something that I showed my advisory board every single year. And I was looking at it every year. I was fortunate to be part of a program too where, there were 4 faculty members, which I know not all of our programs, some of people are running a program just by themselves. So having 4 faculty members as part of a paralegal studies program is often a privilege to have multiple people working with you. But, at least once a year, having some sort of review of it. I don't think that means a revision. And I think you talk to the people who are reviewing it is, hey, here's kind of concerns with revisions, but this is what we're doing. What do we see as potential problem areas or concerns? Whereas maybe seeking more, thinking more about any necessary revisions, um, if something large happens. Like obviously COVID changed a lot of ways of how we did things, changed the way that law firms, courts do things. Is there potentially a need for a revision because of that? But you want to be careful with changing too much, but looking at it every year, very important. Chris, you have anything else to add to that question?
Yeah, and just as an aside, I think too, I agree that looking at it doesn't mean revising it. I think you should review it, and I think it should be reviewed, but that doesn't always mean a revision. Sometimes it means that everything's going well. And I think when we get to the point where I know that when I kind of touch base on our plan, we talk about closing the loop. I mean, the closing the loop part of that is sometimes where those revisions can happen. If you feel that you're already meeting a goal at that point, you can note a change and kind of make a change maybe in the assessment tool that you're using versus changing a goal or the whole assessment plan as a whole. It might be that it just needs to be tweaked that way. And that could be a place where we do it. Um, and Nulifar, we're going to make the PowerPoint available to you. So that chart's in there.
Thank you guys for your answers. I wanted to ask Jenna if you have more than 4 goals in your plan, in your assessment plan.
So those are the overall program goals, are those 4 goals. So we're going to talk next about program outcomes, course outcomes, and unit level outcomes.
Okay.
But these are the program outcomes.
Yeah, and just so you know, Mary, I'll show my plan later too. But we have very similar four program goals. I think a lot of the programs have similar goals. I have 4 as well.
Yeah.
Okay,
Again,
thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
yeah, thanks, Mary. So again, too, and Chris and I trying to get you excited about this. A lot of these things, my guess is you are doing, in regards to, reviewing grades, in regards to, individual course evaluations. Most of our colleges are requiring us to do that anyway, at the University of Cincinnati. And if you're not doing this, it's incredibly helpful. So in the template of every single one of our classes, we have a midterm course evaluation. That has been incredibly helpful for me. And it's a simple thing to do. And it just gives you the kind of climate of the class midway through, which is really helpful. But things like job posting analysis is simple as creating a chart every time a job gets sent to you, charting out what kind of job was that geographically, where was it, what was the area of law. So again, and advisory committees and administration ask questions like that in regards to how many jobs are even being sent. And then boom, you can be able to say, I have it right in front of me. And that's really helpful. But again, a lot of these things you're doing, it's, just keeping it simple, keeping it compliant. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about outcomes, and then I am going to turn it over to Chris. So as I mentioned, we have 4 program outcomes. And when I think of outcomes, I think outcomes are like puzzle pieces. Your unit level outcomes, so the individual units you have, whether you call them a module or a weekly topic, those should fold in to your course level outcomes. And then your course level outcomes should fall into your program outcomes. At the University of Cincinnati, with our course development instructional designers, right now we are making charts that connect all of our outcomes. I think, we go into classes oftentimes, and sometimes we're rushed to get a class created. But when we sit down and think about it thoughtfully, we should have assignments that connect to all of these outcomes that we are trying to achieve. And so I'm not going to read through our specific program outcomes, but you can see that they are really broad, especially when we go in further looking at the course level outcomes and the unit level outcomes. They're incredibly broad compared to what we are going to look at next. And that's purposeful so that the course level outcomes and the unit level outcomes can fold into these. Next, we have course level outcomes. And there are more of these because there's a lot that you are trying to complete in an individual course. And these are specifically from our civil litigation class. So what do we want students to know and be able to do as part of completing this civil litigation course? So things like be able to differentiate between civil litigation and criminal litigation. A lot of these outcomes deal with pleadings and being able to properly format pleadings in the workforce, being able to have the vocabulary that you need to have in a civil litigation practice. So knowing things like jurisdiction and venue and be able to speak about them intelligently and know what they are when walking into a workplace. And so far more detailed than, again, going back, our overview of program outcomes, but those all do fold into these program outcomes really neatly. So demonstrate workplace readiness skills goes to knowing the vocabulary, being able to analyze and evaluate the law, helps us understand when we, are submitting a pleading, how to be able to do so, how to read the court rules, those kinds of things. So making sure that all of these course level outcomes fold in. And I
Jenna,
think
there's a question in the thing, and I actually think it goes to this. So I'm sorry for interrupting, but one of the things that was asked is, about course analysis, right? So here's your course level outcomes, and how do how would you make sure that these things are being achieved? Was the question from Rhonda, and so I think this is more of a, she asked if it could be a survey or if it would be analysis by the instructor. I think you could do a midterm course evaluation to see if you're hitting some of these goals. You could do some sort of feedback from the students. You could do an assignment that would be, something that would tie in some of these goals to see if you've achieved the first half of what you expected to have your outcomes be. But all of that is for, the course analysis. And it could be part of, reaching these outcomes, which there are several more of these than there is of the program that they fold into. I don't know if you want to address that any further than I did.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for pointing that out. And Rhonda, so ours is a student survey that we do. It is directly in our LMS. It's part of our course shell template. So at the University of Cincinnati, we utilize a template. Our classes are all asynchronous or synchronous, but over Zoom. We do not have an in-person, physically on campus program. And so everything that we have designed, we're very fortunate. We have amazing instructional designers. It's called UCO, University of Cincinnati Online. We have a great team that really supports us. So we know we're really fortunate in that. But as part of that, we have a template because we're trying to make all of the classes have the same look and feel. So when a student enters a class, they know how to navigate the class and navigate it well. And so part of that template is this midterm course analysis that students complete. When it comes to any analysis by the instructor, we also have, as part of our template, is a form at the very top of the shell. The students cannot see it, again, because it's for the instructors, but we have a lot of adjuncts. So I think Paige had said the other day that we're running 26 or 28 classes over the summer. That's a lot for a paralegal program. And so at the top is a form that adjuncts, anybody, but adjuncts mainly, could fill out if they noticed anything about the course that needed to be changed or updated or wasn't working well. And so we do seek that feedback from our faculty as well, whether they want to provide it or not. We also provide it. We just had a faculty meeting and we got a lot of feedback that we did from a Google form that we talked about policies. So including those faculty and getting their perspective, assessing them on what's working well and what's not working is important as well. All right. And then finally, talking a little bit about unit level outcomes. So again, this is for a civil litigation course. And, it's kind of our introductory topic on just civil litigation as a whole. Kind of what is it? A lot of these things we, of course, go into in a lot greater detail as we progress into further weeks. But just an initial kind of survey overview of what civil litigation is, what we're going to be talking about, basic factors that go into the process. And again, these have to fold into our course level outcomes. When it comes to, especially, I'm going to go back for just a second, course level outcomes, a lot of times these are requirements as part of a syllabus. So you have to have them on the syllabus somewhere in the course shell. And I think, that's great. We have them there, right? But encouraging faculty to look at them is significant, and maybe putting a little bit more importance on them when you're talking to faculty about their significance and how those will be utilized later on when we're talking about assessment is important. So it's not just a thing we have as part of a syllabus, it's actually something we're going to be evaluating and assessing. And here's why that is significant. Changing that language a little bit, and in some regards, just talking about it all, sometimes we don't even talk about it, is important. On a daily basis, when we're part of a class, we're really thinking about and doing assessment every single week. In some regards, every single day, because it feels like we're grading every single day, right? And so we are assessing our students and what is going well, what they're doing well, what their skill level is, repeatedly. And so part of this, Chris and I wanted to give you examples. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you an example. It doesn't copy over. And I had a question. I want to answer it before I get to the next slide. Do you do your student and faculty surveys every semester for every course? So the midterm course surveys, we do them every single semester for every course. The end of course surveys, we do them every single semester for every single course. Both of those surveys are actually built into our course shells in our template. And so that way we're not going to miss them because they're in the template and students have to see it there. When it comes to faculty surveys, that faculty survey that I mentioned at the top is, again, in every single shell. And then we survey faculty regularly at our individual faculty meetings that we hold per semester. And so hopefully that answers your question. Go ahead, Chris.
And just as an aside to that, and again, differences between programs don't mean anything. It just to let you know there's differences, right? So, we don't have at Bucks like a systems talking to each other. So what we have a lot of problems with is that we could have all of that information and it doesn't necessarily record anywhere else. So we have to report it. So there's a lot of second steps in my program that I have to do. So we might not do surveys as frequently as Cincinnati does, but certainly what we do is we kind of have like a cycle of which classes get reviewed when. So it may not be that they're reviewed every time that they're offered, but they might be reviewed once a year, or if they're offered, in several different semesters. And so we kind of have a plan as to when we review them, but it's not as frequently as that. I think that it's, the more you can review them, awesome. and you're going to be able to get so much information from that. But not every program is kind of adept to do that, especially if that's not kind of the way it's set up in the system. The systems and the things you use are not listening to each other, whatever that word is. But
That's a great point, Chris, and that helps me transition perfectly. So um, for Paige and I, we course coordinate several. She has a kind of a group of course classes she course coordinates, and I have a group. And so for the classes that I course coordinate, really working on creating rubrics for every single assignment. And even for the novice individuals who indicated novice as part of this group, hopefully the concept of rubrics is not something new. I love rubrics for a variety of reasons. So the first reason is it helps me grade. Especially for my synchronous classes, I am someone that wants to give students a ton of feedback. I mean, if I could give the amount of feedback that I actually wanted to give, I would never get grading done because I would just be giving feedback all day long. And so rubrics really help me because I can give that feedback. And then especially in a synchronous class, then I can go to the class and say, okay, I gave you your score, but we're going to talk about like the nitty gritty of what really went well with that assignment and what didn't go well. With asynchronous classes that I'm teaching online and I don't see the students, I still use the rubrics. And then I try to publish a weekly video that goes into, again, the nitty gritty is like, you'll see that this assignment has been graded. I want to talk a little bit about the complaint assignment and what went well and what didn't go well. And if you got this score, what that could have meant. I think it's really valuable to give students that feedback. Now, do all students take that feedback and run with it? Not necessarily. As part of our program, we have an e-portfolio requirement, and I make the students correct their assignments for the e-portfolio. So I should see my feedback in place that I gave them early on in the semester on their assignment and their e-portfolio, it should be corrected. Now, we're very fortunate at the University of Cincinnati, and this is something I'm working on now because I kind of oversee the coordination of assessment, is that our rubrics do talk to a system, kind of like Chris was talking about. We have a system called outcomes that you can align your rubrics with. And then you can take all of, say you have 5 sections of a real estate course. It can pull all of that data from the real estate course from that particular rubric. Now, we're really fortunate that our LMS works in that way. Other people, though, I've worked at other institutions that even if the LMS didn't work in that way specifically, you could still get a lot of robust data just from your LMS system alone. So make sure you're talking to those in your college, whether it be an IR office or an e-learning office, a Center for Teaching and Learning, like what tools are available to me at my particular institution that can help me do assessment better, so that it's not an uphill battle every time. What ways can I do it more efficiently and effectively? We use Canvas at our particular institution at UC. I'm also very familiar with Desire to Learn, which has a lot of the same capabilities. How many classes do you and other full-time faculty teach a semester? So our classes are in 7-week accelerated formats. So I teach 2 in the first 7 weeks of a semester and 2 in the second 7 weeks. But I've also been in an institution where it wasn't accelerated like that. And full-time faculty members had to teach 15 credit hours a semester, and all of the classes were 16 weeks. So I've seen a variety of different formats. Go ahead, Chris.
yeah, at our and we have some modules, but most of our classes are 15 weeks. We do some 7-week classes. Our full-time faculty teach 5 classes at 3 credits each. So that's our typical. And then we teach overloads. So we have very few part-time faculty. So we have 3 full-time faculty. So we do overloads as well. So
Just one thing I want to say. So Carol put in the chat 7 weeks. Yes, but know that, whereas a student might take 15 credit hours, we don't allow our students to take they are taking 2 classes at a time as well. So for those 7 weeks, they are only focusing on those 2 classes that they have within that 7 weeks. And so is it quick? Yes, but I do really enjoy that we're taking a very in-depth look at it and focusing on that. So go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so I think that this program is just to kind of show you the differences that can happen between programs. Because again, we use Canvas as well. But it's the system that kind of reports to. So we have a totally separate system for assessment. All of our information for assessment goes into a separate system. So it's getting it from Canvas to there, and it doesn't transfer as easily in our situation. So I kind of wanted to give you more on the another example of maybe more of an on ground approach where we don't have, we have to actually get this from our faculty who are actually teaching. And it's not necessarily that we get it from Canvas. They're kind of required to report to us. We collect artifacts, which I know I guess sounds archaic at this point, but that's how we do it in order for us to kind of get it reported. We also have a job title called Assessment Fellow, which means that those are the people that are responsible for assessment, and I happen to be that. So mainly just why I kind of jumped on here and joined Jenna today. So this is just kind of an example of our program assessment plan for our paralegal studies program of study. And so as you saw the chart from Jenna before, I mean, we have program goals. The interesting part of the differences between our programs are that we also have these things that are called general education competencies. They exist for those of that our associates programs. Our certificate programs have the 3 program goals, and the gen ed is for our associates as well. And basically we put in here what our goals are and then our assessment schedules. So we usually are assessing a goal a year, and then we rotate those as we go through. And if we do any kind of implementation into anything that is changed then for the following assessment period, then when we get back around, we can note what we've changed and then how that has changed the results. So we can look at from before and after and kind of compare those things. This is just kind of an example of what our program and how we do it. We also have an accreditation that's in addition to our ABA accreditation. We are under business studies. Business studies has to also be accredited by the ACBSP in our state. So that requirement also follows some of these assessments. What I really liked about Jenna's part, and maybe you have no confusion with it, but what I have problems with when we're trying to get faculty on board to making sure that they do assessment in their classes is understanding how she went from the actual like learning objectives for a module, for example, in your class, to then your course goals, and then to your program goals, because oftentimes they confuse those things. Like I'll have a faculty person who'll say to me, well, I have those learning objectives. What do you need from me? Right. So the learning objectives are one thing, but then we've got to get them to match up and do what we need to do from there. So going over that and making sure that they kind of understand that those learning goals are within the course objectives, and then they're within the program goals. And so we sit down and Jen, if you would go to the next slide, the kind of steps that we look at each time. So we get a list of whose classes are being evaluated, and we might have a couple of different faculty who are teaching that course. The other thing that we have at our university that might be a challenge, and I don't know if everybody has this or doesn't, but at my university, instructors and faculty are very hesitant to do anything consistently. They don't like being told what to do as far as their class material. So we don't have one assignment that meets the assessment goals. And so it could be taught by 3 different people, And there are 3 different types of assignments that are used for the assessment of the same goal, but in that class. So it's really an individual thing where I sit down with the instructors who are teaching that class that semester. So for example, if there's a particular course that's being looked at, and that's where the assessment is in, I have to sit down and meet with them to try to help them pick the assignment that most is going to meet the goal, right? So that's kind of where we start. And then we have information that they report to us as to what is their plan for what the assignment is going to look like, what assignment are they doing to meet the specific goal. And then the hope is that, you know, if we are able to get that information right when they complete the assignment, that's usually the best time to catch them. So we first get the plan for them. Once they've completed that assignment, then we get the data from the artifacts from their actual class and their actual assignments and the grades that they got on them. And then we can report it into our system, which is a separate system. So if you could, next slide. So meeting with the instructors mid-semester gives us an opportunity to say, hey, you know, remember you have to do this. Is there an assignment? And, you know, have you given it yet? If you've given it, now we need to collect the results. And at the end of the semester, we meet with them again to do what we say, close the loop. So at that point, we have the results from their rubric, right? So we didn't, you know, we talked a little bit about rubrics. Jenna's rubric example was great. And so, you know, using those rubrics, not only is it help you teach and help you actually grade, but it also lets the students know exactly where they think they're going to get their grade and how that's going to come out. So that if you're hand grading anything, because of, you know, those rubrics aren't tied to an automatic, right? So you have to go in and actually grade. They kind of already have an idea because they know what they hit. They know what points they hit. So it's really helpful to the students as well. But those rubrics are what help us then figure out what these artifacts mean. And so if the rubric is there to kind of tell you how to grade the assignment, then we can talk about, well, are we meeting our goals? Is a certain amount of students hitting where we want to be for that particular goal? And so the last part of our program, we talk about what we call closing the loop. So at that point, as we said before, when somebody asked about reviewing your courses, you know, we review the results that come from this, obviously. And then the question is, are we happy with them? Is that really where we should be? Sometimes it is. Sometimes we're hitting where we need to be. Most of our students are actually hitting that mark or far exceeding that mark. And so we don't necessarily have to change anything. We've reviewed and we found that we're, you know, where we need to be. But sometimes it could be that, you know, they're hitting the mark, but maybe we don't feel like the rubric is actually evaluating it as it should. What do you do with students who don't do the assignment at all? How do they focus? How do their results come into this? And how do they play into this? Is it something that we should be changing up the assignment we're using? Or maybe there needs to be something else that has to be done. So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out what, if anything, needs to be changed going forward, and then what we're going to do with it from there. So, you know, at this point, I would like to just find out, I mean, by a reaction from you guys, you know, do you have to do this kind of collection with artifacts, or is it stuff that actually is just reported out through data collection through your electronic systems? If you, it is just through you know, an actual artifact which you have to collect, could you give me a thumbs up on your reactions just to tell me if you are collecting actual artifacts from your faculty and having to go through this? Okay, so that I know who those people are that are feeling my pain. I only see a few of them though. All right. So yeah, it is definitely a process to try to make sure. And I was saying to Jenna, I mean, last semester, it's always the last thing on our faculty's mind. It's the last thing that they want to do. And so it becomes a real difficulty when we don't necessarily have any teeth in it. So there's nothing like we have to say that you have to do it. It's not required by the teacher's contracts necessarily. So, we have some back and forth with that, like actually getting it done. Nilafar, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
No, that went up by mistake.
I'm sorry?
That I didn't mean to. It just,
That was your thumbs up? Okay, cool.
yeah.
That's
But
fine.
thumbs up to the presentation.
Oh, there you go. Awesome. Yeah, so I see in the chat some people are talking about, turning in artifacts to the campus coordinators. And yeah, I mean, depending upon how you handle it. This past semester, we had to get our deans involved because, we weren't getting kind of the results that we needed to get. So definitely things that are a little bit harder when you're trying to figure out how to get this information. And Mary asked the question about Blackboard LMS has the D2L. I have some familiarity with D2L, and it does have rubric capabilities if that's what you're asking. I haven't had experience with Blackboard, so I don't know the answer, Jenna. I don't know if you have.
I believe that, so Blackboard, there's many different versions, but I believe the newest version of Blackboard, if institutions are on that, they do have rubric capabilities. I was just going to add, Chris, too, when you're talking about, because I have been in a situation where I had to ask adjuncts for information. Now, different instructors and different institutions take this a different way, but at a previous institution I was at, adjuncts could add us into their shell if they wanted to. And granted, it just depends on your timing and your capability and what you want to do. But we asked adjuncts like, hey, we're happy to do this for you and get your data if you add us into your shell, because it is really challenging to get adjuncts to do that. And let's face it, oftentimes they're not getting paid a lot. And so, we as full-time faculty members went in and took that data. So just another thing to think is, if your institution doesn't have those capabilities, is there a way that they, may be okay with you being in the shell? And most adjuncts I encountered were like, yeah, sure, help me. And so just a thought.
Okay.
I think.
Another party have something?
I do have my hands up this time.
Okay.
Follow up on what Jenna was saying. I actually have access to my adjunct faculty's Canvas shell. And the way it came about is because many moons ago, when we were about to lose our certification because things were not getting done properly, the college decided to give the director access to most of the faculty, not full-time faculty, but certainly part-time faculty's Canvas shell. And do we disclose it to them? Yes, there's transparency. That way it actually helps. If they know there's some checks and balances, they know that I can go in and take a peek. I don't make a habit of it because they do a good job, but I think it does help to go and take a look now and then to see it. And also to download what they're doing. They used to email me and they still email me, but they can, if you're using rubrics or not, we know that you can, if they're submitting everything on Canvas, which all of our students do, whether live class or synchronous class, we have made a policy, or I have made it a policy, that all assignments must be submitted via Canvas. So if they do that, then instructors have the ability to go in and make comments on Canvas, right? You can download it and make comments and then upload it back up for the student to see, or you can just do it right on the body of Canvas, which makes it easy for them to download. And if they don't, if I'm getting tired of asking, I go and I download it, or I ask them, what assignment would you like to have downloaded? And I download it. So to that extent, it is easier, and it's a mix of, to your point, Chris, I do have to collect, but it's gotten easier with this piece where I am able to download it and not chase people to do it.
And I think that there's, I mean, again, there's a variety of different things that are going on in the chat. Some other people said that adjuncts are hesitant. In my particular college, there's actually part of the teacher's contract that we don't have access. So there's, there's all kinds of,
Yeah.
differences between college to college. But I appreciate that, yeah, that is helpful. And some adjuncts are fine with it, but it just depends on where you're
Yeah.
at and what you're doing.
The college policies. No, I understand.
Yeah.
Full-time faculty, no, absolutely not. But part-time faculty, we can, and most of my faculty happens to be part-time. The
Yeah.
other comment I wanted to make about assessment is that some of the program level assessment, where we have rubrics that are common to everybody can do their own rubrics. But I've been able to sell to my faculty that here are 5 rubrics you can all use. Like for IREC or like for memorandum, like for if you're doing a PowerPoint, what are the things you're looking for in a PowerPoint, right? So those rubrics, if they're using it, we can, then my assessment team, like Chris, I have a separate body of people who are doing that for the college. They can actually pull those assessments and see how we're doing overall in the different courses that we're offering that semester.
Yeah. And that's, like I said, I think that's what we're doing as far as having, the assessment fellow just for, is an actual credit position. So I get an extra credit for doing that, because it is work. I mean, is that way out? Not really, but other people are doing it as full-time faculty and doing it without any credit. So I'm grateful for that. But that's a possibility too. I'm just gonna kind of get through a couple of things. I did plan on having a breakout. I don't know that we're going to get there, but just so you can see a little bit of the questions that we ask when we do this assessment findings. We talk about the amount of artifacts that we collected. What's the summary of the score? We evaluate the strengths and the weaknesses in the students' work. And when I say we, at my school, it has to be that actual professor, the one who taught the class. So and I try to tell them all the time, you don't want me necessarily to assess your students' work. I mean, you had the students, right? So this is their report to me of how their students, the strength in their work and the weaknesses in their work, and whether or not their target was met. And what are the lessons that they learned about the type of assessment that they used, and whether or not it met their expectations or exceeded their expectations. And Jen, if you could switch to the last slide, the last part of this questionnaire kind of thing that they offer is, about continuous improvement. A lot of our results are given in percentages of how many students were successful. And so in striving for, like, what's that percentage look like? What should that percentage be? And how do we continue to keep it growing and keep it increasing? What's that follow-up? What's the thing that we should try to do something different with? Is it a different assessment? Is it a different rubric? Is it the way we give it? Is it at what time we give it? I mean, all of those things can affect how successful an assessment is, depending on when you use that tool during the class. Did you have something, Jenna?
I was just going to add, when we're talking about challenges in getting adjuncts to do this, another strategy could be offering them, like, hey, here's this form I need you to fill out, or I'm happy to meet with you for 20 minutes and we can just go through it. And I can, like, kind of type up as you're talking, because sometimes it's just like you give someone another form, and think about how much training as full-time faculty members you're getting as assessment. Adjuncts are getting virtually none in a lot of settings. And so they don't even know how to answer these questions. So just sitting down with them may be a great option instead of just, hey, here's this form, fill it out kind of thing.
Yeah, that's why it was part of our plan too, because again, even our full-time faculty, I don't know that they always understand what they're doing, and it changes from time to time. And if you, if you remember, if any of you guys were at any point in time in private practice, I mean, sometimes we handle our own clients like that, right? There's clients that I can send them a form and have them fill it out, and I can get it back promptly, and it comes back with very good answers. there's some clients I know that are not going to send it back or can't fill it out. And so what do? We sit down, the paralegal sits down with them, goes through the stuff. So, I mean, it is easier. It's a shame that necessarily in our situation, I can't just have this reported in some other way, but it is what it is. And so it's not every school is going to be able to do that. So this is kind of what we expect to get back at the end of the day, and then make sure that we have those results. And then the hope is that, maybe they're not the one that's on board for the next time, right? We typically do our assessments in fall. There's some classes that we do in spring, but then they round robins for that way. So it works for us. Can you go to the next slide? So this is just an example of then when we report the findings. Like, for example, this was, a pass 1 for our goal 3. And so we actually take what's on that form and then input it into the system. This is a piece of that system. This just basically talks about, what kind of written assignments or what assignments were done with this and what was the goal. What's the, what is the outcome after we've collected these artifacts, how many artifacts we collected. And then basically that analysis and ideas for action, that's their evaluation of what they think is going to happen. And is there any changes that we should be doing for the next time around and the next time we look at this? So, that's kind of our process from beginning to end. And there's a lot of, unfortunately, involvement for, either the assessment fellow, the program coordinator, those people to follow up and to try to help us get what we need to get as far as data is concerned. So I think that's why I kind of would go back to the fact that the way we started this presentation, which is how do we get people excited about doing stuff that they don't really want to do? And I think that, a lot of times Jenna's approach, I've used that before to say, you're already doing this. This isn't something else you have to do. It's just something you're already doing. We just have to figure out how to connect that to what we need. And then you don't have to do anything extra. You can go to the next slide, Jenna. So what I had originally anticipated in having some fun, keep going, was that we would kind of go into a breakout and try to look at some of these things. But what I'd like to do now, we're kind of already at 1 o'clock. If anybody does have, a comment, something to share about this, I would love to just open it up now, maybe for just 5 minutes, and see if we have any other questions other than was put in the chat. We try to follow those as long as we could. Anybody else have any comments? Just raise a hand and I'll get you. Wow, very quiet. Okay. All right. Well, I guess in finishing up, if I don't see any questions or any concerns, Michael, go ahead.
I apologize. I was trying to find the raise hand button.
Okay.
So if I may have missed this, I apologize. But is everyone kind of doing an assessment, like just an overall program assessment and or academic assessment at the end of every academic year? Is that kind of when everyone's doing it? Because that's what I do. I do an assessment of everything that I have collected for that academic year at the end of that academic year, so that I'm not trying to scramble to do it at a report time or something, right? So, but is that kind of the standard?
I'll add something and I'll let Jenna, whatever she wants to add too. But I think there's many different ways to do this. So, we're doing it based on semester, but we're doing it once a year. So, it's just different how you approach it. I think that if you do it and you do it with regularity as to what you're doing and create a plan of how you're doing it, I don't think there's a wrong or a right. I think there's just different ways. And as long as it's consistent, I don't know, Jenna, if you had something to add to that, but that's my feeling. I think there's plenty of different ways to do this, but I think that as long as it's consistent, you're good.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chris. And I think it just depends on your college and what assessment you're talking about. So, at my previous institution for the college level assessment, they wanted a report yearly, and then every 5 years there was a comprehensive look. And then at UC, we are looking at the end of every semester. When it comes to, ABA reapproval data, again, I think that just depends on college generally, especially because we're required to do the graduate surveys within a period of time. Making sure you get those done appropriately is important. But then on the flip side, assessment is not just doing it, it's also looking at it. So just because you did it didn't necessarily mean you're looking at that graduate information in depth every year. So I think it just depends on what you have going on and this sometimes the size of your program too.
Okay. If I actually was not very clear in what I meant by assessment. So I guess the analysis of the assessment tools, right? So we use all of the tools, the surveys, rubrics, collecting artifacts, all of that every semester. But I don't actually, I mean, I look at it all as I'm collecting it and I'm putting it into a system somewhere. But when we're actually sitting down and treating it like it's a motion for summary judgment, for those who know what that is, those are massive monster things that I hate, but I treat it like an MSJ. So I got everything out, right? And I'm looking at all of it and I'm doing my analysis and I'm writing a report, right? That is not necessarily for the institution, it's for the ABA, but I use it for institutional stuff too. Um, so that's what I meant, right? Like an actual analysis academic year at end of every academic year. So
And again, I think that that's consistent. As long as you're looking at it at some point, the data, and trying to figure out if you're meeting what you need to meet, or if you have to tweak something to whatever. I think that's the way. Nilafar put in there that I don't think the ABA requires an assessment. They look at your assessment, but they don't necessarily say to you, you have to do it X way. I mean, I've not had them say anything to us about the way we do our assessments. So I think as long as we're doing it, and if Jenna has something to add to that, I'll let her.
I was just going to say too, is that, some of the assessment we're doing, take it easy on yourself because there's some that there's no way that you could analyze it with a, fine tooth comb. For example, like end of course student evaluations. Would you as a program director, program coordinator, love to know everything that was a part of that and have some incredible data in regards to that? Sure. But if you're a really large program, think about, I mean, I used to have stacks. I mean, if I had printed it all out, it would be hundreds upon hundreds of pages. And so with all of this, especially if you're a novice, think about it. It's just one step at a time. If you liked the rubric concept that we talked about, you don't have rubrics in your assignment now, it might be overwhelming to think, oh my God, I need to go do all of that now. No, you just need to start one step at a time. Create one rubric for one assignment. And then start the analysis on that and see how that went, and then create the next one. And so it's easy to get overwhelmed by these topics, but it is also easy to just start small and see what works and then keep going.
And Maggie put in a comment in the chat about, the structure of the college. Like her college is very structured, so her assessment data is due the same day as her grades. Well, yeah, that's fantastic, right? And I know that's may not function fantastic if you're the one that has to submit them, because I have a hard enough time getting my grades in, but I get it. I think that would be just an awesome thing, is to connect those two things together and say, this is what you got to have done at the end of the semester.
I'll add to that though. The problem is grades are due at like 2 and you get till midnight on assessment data. So you get a minute to look at it, but that's your last day on the contract. So do you actually go back and look at anything? No.
Yeah.
I'll be honest.
Right.
But
Well,
at
that's the thing.
least there's deadlines given. I know with a lot of institutions, everything is so, like, I like to use the word squishy. It's like, oh, we're doing this, but like there's no deadlines. It's kind of just up in the air. So I agree with you that like that deadline's not exactly user friendly for actual analysis, but I do appreciate when deadlines are given.
No, I do
Me too.
appreciate it, especially for the adjuncts, but I will be honest for myself, like, especially 2 weeks from now, I'm not going to look at my data. I'm going to go to the pool. Like
100%.
Well, and as I said, I feel the pain. I think that the problem that I have, I think my problem most often, and it's the opposite of having deadlines, right? Is that I don't have any. So, I'm constantly into the next semester, still trying to get the stuff from the last semester. And that's also not a good way to function. So, we're all looking at this, right? We're going to keep looking at it. Jenny, you can go to the next slide. I can't remember if I had anything else, but I don't think I did. Yeah, so, again, just the thoughts of, keep discussing about how can you make this easier? How can you present it in a manner that people won't be freaked out about it, and they're not going to like, oh, all of a sudden the walls come up and we're totally resistant because we already think we have enough to do on our plate. How do I make it so that something that's already on your plate? Let's just work with what you're already doing. And, Jenna, any closing comments? I think we're over at this point already.
Yeah, I just put my email in the chat. So if anybody had any questions about any of my parts, feel free to email me. But thank you everybody for coming.
Yep. Thanks everybody. And I hope you have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.